Today, we're going to delve into 7 horror stories involving Airbnb home rentals, all based on real accounts. Get ready to learn about frightening events ranging from bizarre experiences to truly disturbing situations. If you're a fan of chilling stories, this video was made for you. And before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this. Let's go on this journey of terror together. 1. The House of Hidden Cameras. A group of friends decided to spend a relaxing weekend in a modern house located in the historic city of Prague in the Czech Republic. The house, rented via an online platform, promised comfort and privacy, with stunning views of the Vltava River and impeccable contemporary design. Everything seemed perfect for a peaceful break from the hectic routine. On the first evening, while preparing dinner, one of the friends, Lucas, noticed something strange on the smoke detector in the living room. He noticed a small reflection that seemed unusual. Intrigued, he took out his cell phone and used the flashlight to illuminate the area. That's when he saw the characteristic glow of a camera lens. "Guys, there's a camera here!" he exclaimed, drawing the attention of the others. The discovery put everyone on alert. They started searching the house and found more hidden cameras in strategic places, a clock in the kitchen, a painting in the hallway, and even inside a speaker in the master bedroom. The feeling of invasion of privacy gripped the group. "This is illegal! Who would do something like that?" said Anna, visibly shaken. When they decided to leave the house immediately, they realized that the doors were electronically locked. They tried to open the windows, but they were all sealed. It was then that a cold voice echoed through the speakers. "You're not going anywhere." Panic set in. The voice continued, "I watched you from the moment you arrived. Every step, every word. You are taking part in an experiment." The message was disturbing and increased the tension in the room. With no internet access or cell phone signal due to the house's electronic lockdown, the friends found themselves isolated and vulnerable. Lucas remembered reading about similar cases in recent news reports. In 2024, for example, a family in Anápolis, Brazil, discovered hidden cameras in a rented house that recorded their routine without consent. He shared this information with the group to try to keep them calm and suggested that they look for any electronic device that could be used to disable the system. As they explored the house in search of answers, they found a panel hidden behind a false mirror in the bathroom. The panel contained monitors displaying live images from all the cameras scattered around the house. There was also a computer with files named with precise dates and times. It was clear that this wasn't just a casual break-in, it was something planned. Anna managed to access the computer and discovered that the recordings were being transmitted to a remote server. She tried to interrupt the transmission while Lucas looked for tools to open the doors manually. After hours of joint effort, they managed to open one of the downstairs windows and escape. As soon as they left the house, they ran to the nearest police station to report what had happened. The local police launched an investigation and discovered that other people had rented the same property before and reported similar experiences. The owner of the property was identified as a programmer, obsessed with surveillance and psychological control. The case gained international repercussions and sparked debates about privacy in online rental properties. Experts reinforced the importance of checking for suspicious signs when renting properties, looking for characteristic reflections from flashlight lenses, or using apps to identify devices connected to the Wi-Fi network. Despite the trauma they experienced, the friends decided to share their story as a warning to other travelers. They would never forget that weekend in Prague, not for the landscapes or the charm of the historic city, but for the terrifying experience in the House of Hidden Cameras. 2. The dead girl's room. A young couple, Clara and Miguel, decided to spend a few days in New Orleans, a city full of history, mystery, and legends. Fascinated by the charm of the French Quarter, they chose to rent a room in a historic mansion in the area. The property, with its colonial architecture and ornate details, seemed straight out of an old tale. The host, an elderly man named Mr. Beaumont, welcomed them with an enigmatic smile and a warning: respect the silence of the night. On the first night, while the city seemed asleep, Clara was awoken by strange sounds. Light footsteps echoed down the corridor, followed by a childish giggle that seemed to come from the next room, a room that Mr. Beaumont had mentioned was empty. Intrigued and frightened, she woke Miguel. "Did you hear that?" she asked in a whisper. He nodded, trying to ignore the shiver that ran up his spine. Armed with courage and an improvised flashlight with his cell phone, they decided to investigate. When they opened the door to the next room, they were surprised by a peculiar scene: old toys scattered on the floor and a porcelain doll sitting in a rocking chair. In the doll's hand was a weathered note that read, "Don't leave me alone." The atmosphere was stifling. Clara felt a chill as she touched the doll and quickly stepped back. "This can't be real," muttered Miguel, trying to rationalize what they were seeing. They decided to go back to their room and wait until dawn to confront Mr. Beaumont. The next morning, over breakfast in the main hall of the mansion, Clara couldn't contain her curiosity. "Mr. Beaumont, there's something we need to ask you," she began hesitantly. Her host raised his eyes slowly and replied calmly, "I imagine you heard something during the night." He sighed deeply before continuing, "That room belonged to my daughter, Amélie." The couple exchanged confused glances as Mr. Beaumont continued, "Amélie passed away many years ago. She was only 8 years old when she contracted yellow fever." He pointed to a portrait on the wall, showing a smiling girl with curly hair and sparkling eyes. She loved that room and her toys. Since her departure, many guests have reported hearing her laugh or feeling her presence. Clara shivered as she remembered the laughter she had heard the night before. "But what about the doll?" asked Miguel. The host smiled wistfully. "It was her favorite toy. They say her spirit is still attached to it." Mr. Beaumont's story brought up memories of local legends about haunted houses in New Orleans, such as the famous La Laurie Mansion or Myrtle's Plantation, both known for their macabre stories involving restless spirits. The city was a melting pot of supernatural mysteries intertwined with its rich cultural history. That night, Clara and Miguel decided to leave flowers in Amélie's room as a gesture of respect. When they re-entered the gloomy room, they realized that the doll was no longer in the rocking chair. It was now on the bed, perfectly arranged, as if someone had carefully placed it there. The couple left the mansion the next day with mixed feelings of relief and fascination. New Orleans had given them more than they expected, not only vibrant music and delicious cuisine, but also a glimpse of the inexplicable that made the city so unique. The experience marked them deeply and became a story often shared among friends, not as something scary or negative, but as a reminder that there are mysteries in the world beyond human comprehension. 3. The House of the Abyss. A writer in search of inspiration, Edward, decided to isolate himself in a house on the edge of a cliff on the coast of Ireland. The property, located in a remote and hard-to-reach spot, was known for its breathtaking views of the Atlantic Ocean and absolute silence, just what he needed to complete his new novel. However, from the very first night, something seemed wrong. While reviewing his notes, he heard distant screams that seemed to be coming from outside. Thinking it was the wind beating against the cliffs, he ignored the sound and went back to work. But over the days, the visions began. Whenever he looked out of the window overlooking the cliff, Eduardo saw indistinct figures falling into the void. He blinked, and the images disappeared. "It's just my imagination," he repeated to himself. On the third night, the screams became louder and clearer. They were human voices, anguished and desperate. Eduardo decided to investigate. With a flashlight in hand, he left the house and walked to the edge of the cliff. The icy wind cut through his skin as it illuminated the abyss below. There was nothing but the waves breaking violently on the rocks. Back in the house, he found something that hadn't been there before, an old letter on the living room table. Trembling, he opened the envelope and read, "They call me every night. I couldn't resist." The signature was illegible, but the date indicated that it had been written over 30 years ago. Intrigued and frightened, Eduardo began to research the history of the house. He discovered that it had been the scene of a series of mysterious suicides over the decades. Local residents avoided the place, believing it to be cursed or haunted by restless spirits. Legend had it that those who stayed there long enough were drawn to the same tragic fate. The situation worsened when Eduardo began dreaming of unknown people calling his name from the bottom of the cliff. In one of these dreams, he found himself walking towards the edge without being able to stop his own steps. He woke up in a cold sweat and realized he was in the living room, not the bedroom where he had fallen asleep. The next day, determined to unravel the mystery before he completely lost his sanity, Eduardo explored the surroundings of the house more carefully. He found a small, abandoned cemetery hidden among the trees near the cliff. The gravestones were weathered, but some of the inscriptions were still legible. They all belonged to people who had died under similar circumstances. Falls from the cliff. On the last night before he decided to leave the house, Eduardo was once again awoken by screams. This time, however, they weren't far away. They were coming from inside the house. Following the terrifying sounds to the basement, he found a door locked with rusty chains. With effort, he managed to open it and revealed a dark room with walls covered in frantic scribbles, drawings of cliffs and figures falling into the void. In the center of the room was an antique mirror with a gilded frame. When Eduardo approached to inspect it, he saw his own reflection being pulled out of the window by invisible hands. He recoiled in horror and fled the basement. The next morning, without looking back, Eduardo left the house forever. He later learned that other writers had rented the place in the past and experienced similar phenomena, but few survived to tell their stories. The experience left a deep impression on Eduardo and influenced his writing in the years that followed. He never returned to that house on the edge of the abyss, a place where reality and legend met in a dangerous territory between the natural and the supernatural. 4. The Mansion of Mirrors. A group of tourists, made up of 4 friends, decided to spend a weekend in a historic mansion in the Tuscany region of Italy. The property, known as the Villa degli Specchi, Mansion of Mirrors, was famous for its vintage decor and the countless antique mirrors that adorned every room. With their ornate frames and slightly weathered glass, the mirrors gave the place an air of mystery and elegance. From the moment I arrived, something seemed peculiar. The reflections in the mirrors seemed sharper than usual, as if they were watching the visitors with an unsettling curiosity. However, the friends attributed this sensation to travel fatigue and decided to enjoy their stay. On the first night, while they were having dinner in the main dining room, one of the friends, Ricardo, commented, "Have you noticed that our reflexes take a while to keep up with our movements?" Everyone laughed, thinking it was just a joke, but when they started to pay attention, they realized that he was right. The reflexes seemed to hesitate for a brief moment before imitating his gestures. Later that night, while everyone was asleep, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the mansion. Sophia, one of the tourists, woke up startled and went to check what had happened. In the living room, she found a broken mirror on the floor. Strangely, there was no sign of wind or any apparent reason for the incident. She returned to her room upset, but decided not to wake the others. The next morning, they realized that one of their friends, Daniel, was missing. His bed was intact, and his things were still in the room. Worried, they began to search the mansion and the surrounding area for him, to no avail. Then something terrifying happened. As they passed a large mirror in the main hallway, they saw Daniel's reflection standing there, even though he wasn't physically there. "That's impossible!" exclaimed Sophia as she stepped back in shock. Daniel's reflection seemed to be trying to say something, but no sound came out. He just pointed to the upper floor of the mansion before slowly disappearing into the glass. Frightened and curious, the friends climbed the stairs to the mansion's attic. There they found a locked room with a heavy wooden door. After forcing it open, they discovered a room full of antique mirrors, stacked on top of each other. In the center of the room was a large oval mirror with Latin inscriptions on the frame. Speculum animarum, the mirror of souls. As they tried to understand the meaning of the inscription, the reflections in the mirrors began to move of their own accord. Indistinct figures appeared on the shiny surfaces, unknown faces screaming silently and hands pressed against the glass as if trying to escape. It was then that Ricardo noticed something disturbing. Among the figures in the mirrors was Daniel, trapped in one of the reflections. He seemed desperate to communicate with them. "We need to get him out of here!" shouted Ricardo. As they touched the oval mirror in the center of the room, they felt a supernatural force pull them back. A whispering voice echoed through the room. "Those who stare too long into the abyss end up being consumed by it." Panicked, the friends ran out of the attic and locked the door behind them. Not knowing how to save Daniel or explain what had happened to the local authorities, they decided to leave the mansion immediately. As they sped off along the winding Tuscan road, they took one last look at the property through the car's rearview mirror and saw their own reflections in the mansion's window panes waving at them. The story of the Villa degli Specchi remained with them as a terrifying and inexplicable enigma. They later discovered that the mansion had a local reputation for being cursed since the 18th century. Its construction was said to have involved occult practices carried out by the first owner, an alchemist obsessed with capturing human souls in mirrors. Although they never returned to the Mirror Mansion, the friends carried with them the disturbing memory of that stay and the weight of knowing that Daniel was still inside, trapped between the eternal reflections of that cursed place. 5. The chalet in the forest. Two couples, Laura and Pedro, together with Mariana and Rafael, decided to escape their routine and rented a remote chalet surrounded by a dense forest. Located in an isolated region in Scandinavia, the chalet was described as a perfect refuge to relax and disconnect from the world. With no cell phone or internet signal, they were looking forward to spending the weekend enjoying nature and each other's company. The chalet was rustic, with dark wooden walls and large windows that offered a view of the seemingly endless forest. The silence was absolute, interrupted only by the sound of the wind blowing through the trees. As night fell, darkness enveloped the place like a heavy cloak, creating an atmosphere that was both peaceful and unsettling. On the first night, while they were playing cards in the living room lit only by candles, they heard knocks on the windows. Everyone froze for a moment. "It must be the wind," said Pedro, trying to sound unconcerned. However, the knocks continued, now at different windows around the house. Rafael grabbed a flashlight and went outside to investigate. Despite looking around the cottage, he found nothing but the shadows cast by the trees. The next morning, when they opened the door to go out and explore the forest, they found bloody handprints in the wood. The prints were small, as if they were those of a child. "Is this some kind of prank?" asked Mariana, trying to hide her nervousness. But there was no one around who could have done that. The day passed slowly as they tried to ignore what had happened. They went for a walk through the forest and found old trails that looked like they hadn't been used for decades. At a further point, They discovered a circle of stones covered in moss, which appeared to be some kind of abandoned altar. Laura felt an inexplicable chill as she looked at the place and insisted that they return to the cottage. On the second night, events became even more disturbing. While they slept, strange sounds echoed through the house, footsteps upstairs and indistinct whispers coming from the walls. When Raphael turned on the living room light in the early hours of the morning, he saw something fleeting through the window. A tall, thin figure disappearing between the trees. At dawn, they realized something was wrong. All the doors were locked from the outside with rusty chains that hadn't been there before. Trapped inside the cottage, and with no means of communication, they began to panic. Laura found an old diary under one of the beds. The pages were full of incoherent notes about voices in the forest and eyes watching at night. The last entry read, "They come when it's dark. There is no escape." While they were trying to find a way out or some logical explanation for the events, they heard the knocking on the windows again, now louder and more insistent. Peter looked through the gap in the curtain and saw several figures standing at the edge of the forest, motionless human silhouettes that seemed to be watching them. When night fell again, the four decided to lock themselves in the main room of the cottage with all the improvised tools they could find to protect themselves. The sounds around the house became more intense, footsteps on the roof, scratches on the walls, and distant laughter that seemed to come from all directions. In the middle of the night, the candlelight suddenly went out, and everything was completely silent. When dawn broke again, Laura was the first to open her eyes, but she realized that something was wrong. Raphael was no longer there. They searched desperately for him inside the cottage and in the immediate vicinity of the house when they finally managed to open the chains on the front door. There was no sign of him anywhere. However, as they passed the altar abandoned in the forest during their search, they saw something that made them freeze, bloody bare footprints around the stones. With no answers or help in sight, the remaining three decided to leave the cottage immediately before something worse happened to them too. When they reached the main road hours later, they reported the disappearance to the local authorities, but Raphael was never found. The chalet was abandoned again after the incident and gained a reputation among locals as a cursed place where no one should venture. As for the survivors, they would never forget that terrifying weekend, nor the shadowy figures they kept watching from the forest as they set off, never to return. 6. The property of ritual. A group of friends made up of Julia, Marcos, Camila, and André were looking for a special place to spend the long holiday. After some online research, they found a luxurious property in a rural area on the outskirts of Salem, Massachusetts, a town famous for its dark history related to the witch trials in the 17th century. The price was surprisingly affordable, which made them excited to close the booking. The house was impressive, a secluded mansion surrounded by tall trees and with architecture that blended the modern and the classic. When they arrived, they were greeted by an elderly janitor called Mr. Whitaker, who handed them the keys and gave them a peculiar warning. "The house is all yours, but avoid exploring the basement. It's full of old and dangerous things." They laughed at the comment, thinking it was just an attempt to scare them. The first few days were uneventful. They enjoyed the pool, cooked together, and explored the estate's surroundings. However, on the second night, Camilla noticed something strange while getting wine in the kitchen. There were marks on the floor near the basement door, as if someone had recently dragged something heavy. "It must be the janitor's doing," said André, trying to reassure her. The group's curiosity grew until they decided to go down to the basement the following afternoon. There, they found a large, dark space with stone walls and a musty smell. In the center of the room, there were strange symbols carved into the floor in the shape of a circle. Unlit candles were arranged around the symbols, along with small bones that appeared to be those of animals. Julia felt a chill at the sight. "Is this some kind of ritual?" she asked quietly. Marcos tried to lighten the mood by taking photos and joking about how they could post it as Gothic decoration, but everyone felt a growing tension in the air. They decided to leave the basement quickly and lock the door again. That night, while they were sleeping, Julia was woken up by whispers coming from the hallway. When she opened her bedroom door, she saw shadows moving through the house, hooded figures who seemed to be walking towards the basement. She ran to wake the others, but when they returned to the hallway, the shadows had disappeared. The group stayed up until dawn, discussing whether they should leave immediately or whether they were just imagining things. They decided to stay one more night before leaving the next day. On the last night, something terrible happened. At around 3 in the morning, everyone was woken up simultaneously by a low, repetitive sound, like drums echoing through the house. When they opened their bedroom doors, they realized they were no longer alone. Hooded figures surrounded the main room of the mansion in absolute silence. The friends were forced down to the basement by the mysterious figures who guided them with firm gestures. Down below, the circle with the symbols was now illuminated by the burning candles. In the center of the circle was a makeshift altar with strange objects, small skulls, rusty daggers, and an old book with frayed pages. One of the figures began chanting words in an unknown language, while the others formed a circle around their friends. Julia tried to scream, but her voice seemed stuck in her throat. Camilla began to cry silently, while Marcos and Andre looked around desperately for any possible escape route. Suddenly, the candles went out by themselves, and everything was in complete darkness. The sound of the drums stopped abruptly and was replaced by the sound of something scratching the walls, like sharp claws sliding across stone. When the lights flickered faintly again, the hooded men had disappeared without a trace. The group ran out of the house without looking back and hurried into the car. As they drove along the deserted road at high speed, Julia looked in the rearview mirror and saw something she would never forget. The hooded figures were standing at the entrance to the property, watching them go. When they reached the nearest town, they reported the incident to the local police. However, when the officers went to investigate the mansion the next day, they found no sign of the symbols in the basement or the candles mentioned by the friends. The only thing left was the old book left on the altar, now completely blank. The group was never able to explain exactly what happened that night or who the hooded figures were, but they all agreed never to rent detached properties again, especially those with too affordable prices. 7. The Burning House. A family made up of Anna, João, and their 2 children decided to rent a modern house in a quiet area of California for their vacation. The house was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, minimalist decor, and a garden overlooking the mountains. Everything seemed perfect for days of rest and fun. On the 3rd night, at around 2 in the morning, Anna woke up to a strong smell of smoke. Startled, she got up quickly and realized that the smell seemed to be coming from the hallway. As she opened her bedroom door, she heard desperate cries echoing through the house. "Help me! Please!" The voices were so intense that she ran to wake João and the children. The family ran out into the garden, expecting to find the house in flames. However, when they looked back, they were perplexed. There was no fire. The house was intact, with no sign of smoke or heat. Even so, the smell lingered in the air as if something was burning nearby. When they decided to go back inside, they noticed something even stranger. The inside walls were marked by dark stains that looked like burn scars. It was as if the house had been consumed by a fire a long time ago. "This wasn't here before," said João, trying to remain calm. The next day, while exploring the house in more detail in search of answers, they found a compartment hidden behind a panel in the living room. Inside were clippings from old newspapers reporting on a devastating fire that had occurred in that same property decades ago. According to the reports, the original house had been destroyed in a tragedy that took the lives of a young woman called Margaret and her young daughter. Anna felt a chill when she read the details. Neighbors had reported hearing screams coming from the house during the fire, but when firefighters arrived on the scene, they found no one in the rubble, only the marks of the flames on the walls. That night, the smell of smoke came back even stronger. The screams began again, now accompanied by the sound of hurried footsteps upstairs. When João went upstairs to investigate with a flashlight in hand, he found his children's beds covered in soot, even though there was no fire anywhere. The family decided to leave the house immediately and spent the last night of their vacation in a nearby hotel. Before leaving the area for good, Anna talked to local residents and discovered that the new house had been built on the foundations of the old one, destroyed by the fire. The experience left a deep impression on the family. They never rented isolated properties again and began to carefully research the history of the places where they would be staying. As for the modern house with flame marks invisible to time, it remained a mystery, an unsettling reminder that some tragedies never completely disappear. And those were the 7 horror stories involving Airbnb rentals. So, what did you think? Which one was the scariest in your opinion? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video and want more content like this, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching and see you next time.